all of our main KPIs are connected with sales KPIs. So if the sales team isn't hitting their goals, then marketing is not hitting our goals. And sure, we have different leading indicators, right? You want to look at things like impressions and web traffic and all that. But if it's not actually resulting in opportunities created, revenue closed, then we're not prioritizing our time correctly, because those are the business level results that need to happen.
Right.
So.
Welcome to another episode of the Growth League podcast. I'm your host, Caleb Clark, and today I am with my guest, Steve Murray. He is the Director of Marketing at PayNearMe, which is, I'll let you tell us more, Steve, but it's a modern and reliable payments platform that lets your customers pay how, when, and where they want. Steve, you spent your entire career developing, implementing digital marketing programs, that inspire and engage people and build brands. Tell us a little bit about your journey as a marketer and a marketing leader that brought you to where you are today with PayNearMe.
Sure. First, it's Murphy. Close though.
Oh, what did I say, Murray? Okay.
Yeah, that's all right. It happens.
I got to start over.
And those are definitely some big words you used in your introduction. I think they're in my bio, and they're definitely pushing the limits to
I like it.
brands, but it's definitely something I look to aspire to. I really started in my career as kind of a marketing mercenary, if you will. A lot of my earlier jobs were just going in, being the marketing person and kind of taking it all in. And a lot of that happened on the agency side. So really started my career from the ground up, digital marketing, agencies, and small businesses. And then finally worked my way up to PayNearMe. I was really ready to jump to the brand side. And it just looked like an incredible opportunity to work on a real true product, something I can go deep into and expand on in an industry that I thought was really interesting. So that's what brings me here today.
And what I've talked to a few folks who have made the pilgrimage across the line from agency to brand side, and there's a number of different reasons why that happens for them. But for you, what was the call?
Well, I love starting in an agency because it's so much exposure, right?
Yeah.
You have to do everything. You have to learn about new industries. So in terms of learning the basic skills of problem solving, gap analysis, and learning how to kind of do everything with less. I thought that was a really good start, but one of the frustrations with working at an agency was you never really get to go as deep as you want to, right? You only get surface level with the client. You kind of see what they want you to see. And
I don't know what agency you were at, man, but no, I'm just kidding.
Sure.
Continue.
It never felt very connected to anyone I was working with, right? Because you tend to move across a lot of clients pretty quickly. And maybe that was just the agencies I was with.
No, I'm joking.
But I really saw, moving into a tech company with a pretty intricate product, it was a really good opportunity to stick somewhere where I could actually dig deeper, learn the ins and outs, right? Visit more with the product, and tell much more interesting stories over time that I really didn't have that experience with in agencies.
Yeah. Well, I didn't have I don't have the benefit of jumping ship from the other thing I run, which is a digital marketing agency. So everything you described there in terms of the problems with agencies I agree with. And it's one of the reasons why we built this company called Hook and Ladder, is to be built around going for depth, going for integration and partnership versus what typically needs to happen in an agency, which is, high billable hours, lots of clients under the thing. But anyways, as an aside, why you alluded to it, but PayNearMe, like what problems does it solve for who? Why do you think it's the best? Because there's a lot of different probably imitation competitors. Why do you think PayNearMe is well positioned to win?
Well, not to be insulting, but some might consider where we work to be kind of boring, right? We help solve a lot of issues with the bill payment process.
Sure.
Not a lot of people get jazzed about bill pay, right? Like you would about some consumer brands or social media apps or things like that. But it's a really interesting problem because you think of the way that you interact with money, right? You probably use Venmo to send money to your friends. You're used to things like Amazon or Uber, where checking out is just part of the process. You don't really think about the payment necessarily. It just kind of happens.
Right.
And yet, when you want to pay your car bill or your water bill, you hit a brick wall because it's this long drawn out process,
It really is.
really difficult. Maybe you can only pay with your debit card or your bank account. So it's not necessarily intuitive, and that's not always where your money is. And it just feels like a remnant from 30 years ago that just kind of crawled its way along till now. And I find things that are quote unquote boring like that to be really interesting because they affect pretty much everyone who doesn't pay bills, who's an adult, lucky people. In general, it's a problem we all face, and yet it's something that everyone just kind of accepts as, well, I guess I have to do it this way because that's the only way I can. So I thought that was just a really cool problem they were solving, that they said, let's take this boring thing, bill pay, and bring it to the modern age, and have, the way that consumers pay for everything else, they can now pay
Yeah.
their bills.
You speak so much about finding the problem interesting. For you personally, is that required for anything that you put your thumbprint on, or that you decide to invest your time into? Does it need to, I don't know, intrigue you in some way?
It does. I think that's the reason I've always been with small companies, startups, things like that. I don't like doing the same thing over and over again. It just doesn't jive with who I am. So I always like to be digging into something that's new or exciting, or has some unique challenges. That's where I feel most at home. And it's definitely a requirement when I'm working to make sure that I keep having that, right? Because otherwise, if it's just the same in, same out, I tend to lose interest.
What's your favorite part about being a marketing director, a marketing leader? So beyond a marketer.
Sure. On the leadership side, it's learning how to be one. That's one of those challenges, right? As I mentioned earlier in my career, I was a mercenary. Hey, go solve these marketing challenges, do whatever you have to do, come back and bring us results. Now I have a team under me. I have those that depend on me to help them develop. And it's certainly, in my opinion, one of my greatest weaknesses coming in, because I simply never had to do that before. I think becoming a dad helped with that, having two little humans that depend on me day in, day out, and having a lot of patience and things like that, and having a background in coaching and helping other people. But it's certainly the most rewarding part of my day is when you all of a sudden see yourself becoming extremely replaceable because your team has gone beyond what you've ever imagined, and they can do things much better than you can do on your own. That's such a fulfilling thing for me to see, and also motivating me to then learn something new so that I don't get replaced.
I mean, for a lot of people, they would run away from situations like that, but you're defining that as your favorite part about being the marketing director is the ability to be in a situation where you're not expert status yet, but it's about the growth and it's about the experience of putting you in that tough spot, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I don't really think I'm an expert in anything. I'm a dabbler in general. Like, you have some people that say like, oh, I'm a snowboarder. I snowboard. That's my identity, right? Or I'm this kind of person. I don't really have anything like that, like a favorite band or favorite movie or favorite things. I like to dabble. So I don't think I'm really an expert at anything, which is pretty freeing because it allows me to explore a lot of things and not ever feel like I'm locked into that one thing that I'm really good at. Instead, I get to explore, try new things, and get pretty good at them, and then apply that to everything else I'm doing and try to draw more connections. If anything, that's really where I've been useful to the companies I've worked at, is being able to draw connections between different dots.
I think that's you've just defined expertise, at least the way it shows up for you, right? Self-awareness is expertise. Knowing where you end and others start, and what role you play in connecting those sections is expertise. So I think that's a great example. Tell me a little bit about, we've talked about team. Tell me about how the team is made up there, at least your immediate marketing team. And then, what has been your playbook to motivating, empowering, holding to account, these types of things?
Sure. Our function is split up into a couple groups, though we are still a growing company. So there is still some overlap, but in general, I run the growth marketing / demand gen team, call it whatever you will, which is myself, 2 marketing managers, and an events manager. We then have a product marketing team, a marketing operations team, a brand social PR team, and sitting on top, we have our CMO / SVP of marketing. And then all the gaps we fill in with different agencies, contractors, and consultants.
Right. Besides some of the traditional sort of indicators of success or KPIs, is there anything unique within your team, or maybe not unique, but more prioritized than the rest of them in terms of, this is how we hold ourselves to an understanding of, are we on track? Are we behind track? Are we winning? Are we losing? Are we going in the right direction? What does that show up for you guys?
Well, we try to make it as objective as possible. So you should know clearly if you're succeeding or failing. I think anxiety about that is one of the leading causes that people leave jobs, if they don't know if they're doing what's right and what's wrong. So we try to avoid that as much as possible. And one of the main measuring sticks we have, being a B2B company that has a sales-led go-to-motion, is all of our main KPIs are connected with sales KPIs. So if the sales team isn't hitting their goals, then marketing is not hitting our goals. And sure, we have different leading indicators, right? You want to look at things like impressions and web traffic and all that. But if it's not actually resulting in opportunities created, revenue closed, then we're not prioritizing our time correctly, because those are the business level results that need to happen.
Right.
So we've been pretty lucky to have a really good relationship with sales, though. So we're able to refocus and reprioritize based on what their needs are.
So you guys aren't pointing fingers at each other. We talk a lot about, the big term sales and marketing integration, and, what are some of the practices and things you can do to narrow that gap. And what you mentioned is one that does not get mentioned a lot, which is just share a scoreboard, right? By sharing a scoreboard, you're automatically a little bit more, or quite a bit more integrated than not, if you're looking at the same set of data, and that data is defining success in both functions, right? So you talked about you have a good relationship with the sales team. Like, how does the sales cycle work for, like, just generally high level with you guys? And then how do you know how to reverse engineer your marketing system? Like, where do you guys plug in?
Yeah, I'll share a secret with you. The most important thing we can do to align with sales is to talk to them.
Oh, that's good.
Absolutely. It's like no one knows this.
For sure. Do you think it's that there's an unwilling, in situations where there's no communication going on, is it an unwillingness, or is it not knowing how to approach? Or
probably a mix of both, mix of leadership that isn't aligned, right? Our marketing and sales leadership are extremely aligned, and they talk every day. And even middle managers in marketing and sales talk every day, and those doing the actual work talk every day. Yeah. So we have a lot of open communication between Slack, weekly calls, and just sharing of common docs and spaces. We work the same way they do. It helps us align because we're kind of in the same spots at the same time.
Right.
So we're able then to work with them. So you had asked, how do we know when to realign, right? Yeah. For example, we share a tool called Gong. Sales uses Gong to map out and record all their conversations. Marketing uses it to listen in. So we'll go in and listen into a couple calls a week and say like, hey, are they using the messaging that we've provided them with? How is that messaging doing? Does the prospect look bored on the other end of the phone? Right. And we can then take that data, talk to sales about it, get some feedback on it, and then go back and rework it. So it's a very open loop system. And I think everyone's pretty open to that feedback. And by building a culture where people can listen to feedback, we're able to do a lot more by not having to dance around.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a great system. Well, you'll actually put pen to paper on some key messaging that would then be adopted by the sales team, like verbal messaging, not, an ad or something like that.
Oh yeah. I mean, our product marketing team, they're the superheroes that handle a lot of the messaging. But we're all in there, right? Because everyone hears something different. I
Right.
might be in the market on social groups, just listening and seeing what different forum discussions are saying. Someone else might be listening to Gong calls or reading call transcripts, and someone else might be an SDR pitching on the phone and getting that first foot in the door every day. So
Right.
between all of us, we're always asking what's working, what's getting you in, and then what's pushing you forward, because what gets you in sometimes isn't always aligned with what gets you to the next stage. So listening to everyone's input, kind of chucking ego aside a little bit and
Right.
testing things out is how we're able to get the right messages to the sales team.
Gotcha. So all that data becomes the raw materials from which you build the marketing system on, right?
Yeah.
Versus assumptions or other external research or data. It's you're getting right to the heart of it.
We do a little bit of both. We
Yeah.
do our own research. We looked at third-party research. It's just, it goes back to the theme of connecting the dots, right? If you see something here and there and over there, and it all seems to jive, then you're probably onto something interesting.
Yeah. Going back to one of my earlier questions, I said, what's your favorite part about, being a marketing director, marketing leader? For you, what's the most difficult or challenging part about this role, about this position, both for you and, maybe you have other colleagues at other company or other people in your network that have the same role. What's the hardest part of the job for you?
Kind of riffing on the part I liked most, was
Yeah.
the difficulty of learning how to manage. I think one of the factors that leads to that is I just like doing things. I like creating, right? When you're in a role for so long that you're in there in the Adobe Creative Suite, or you're writing blogs, or you're creating presentations, and you're in the thick of it, it's addictive, right? You kind of get that high from being able to actually put your hands on something and see it go to the market. But when you're a manager and you have others depending on you, and you have a more strategic focus you have to adhere to, you don't always get to be a part of the action as much. And you kind of have to look from afar. And I think one of the big challenges there is trusting your people to do what they do, and making sure that you're putting frameworks, guidelines, and processes in place so that you can enable them to do the work to get the results, rather than having strong opinions on exactly how they get there. Instead, give them the tooling to do it themselves. I
Yeah.
think that remains a challenge. It's something I always ask my team: if I'm being too intrusive in this work and not providing meaningful feedback, please let me know so I could take a step back.
Yeah, I've experienced that same challenge and struggle myself in building a company where at one point I was doing everything, right? And you're not part of the action. Somebody, I guess I was sharing this challenge with somebody similar to how you're sharing it now, and it's like, well, you're tired of being, or sorry, you're missing out on being in the game, in the action, right? And so it's like, if that's what you need to feel alive, it's all about just change the game, right? Get back into the game, but just play a different game. And so it seems like you're doing that because you said it's your most exciting or your favorite part about being the marketing director too, is almost playing a new game now, right?
Absolutely. Sometimes easier said than done,
Yeah, sure.
but it's good to have self-improvement goals and make sure that I'm
Yeah.
grading myself appropriately.
Without getting into details and specific numbers, but more about the art or the science of budgeting and budget allocation. What's been your approach to, coming to a blank Excel sheet and a upcoming fiscal or quarter or whatever, and how do you approach the art or the science of budgeting high level?
I mean, in general, I've done zero-based budgeting in the past, which is, I think, an incredible experience for those who haven't done it, because you truly have to justify everything from scratch rather than relying on last year's numbers. We don't necessarily do that now, but I try to do it in a few ways. Number one is what we're doing, setting us up for success, not this year, but next year. I think marketing in an org like ours, where we're going after much higher value deals, much longer sales cycles, the marketing work you do this year isn't really going to show its effects until the year after. So looking at things with a much longer telescope is really important for budgeting correctly. Because if I know each year I'm going to grow a certain percent, I have to include that into this year's numbers to make sure that we have enough at-bats to win. And other than that, I mean, we kind of know it works at this point. We have a pretty good idea, but we also leave a little bit of wiggle room for creativity and experimentation.
Yeah.
Which has worked really well.
What about those times, because it comes up a lot for marketing leaders where, a good idea gets tabled, but the decision ultimately becomes that we're not going to include it in this period's budget. So we parking lot it, we put it on the shelf. Do you guys come back? Have you experienced that? And do you come back to those things and actually bring them in, or do they just become something that disappear into the abyss forever?
Sometimes it can be difficult as a growing company and smaller team to keep track of every good idea you've had. And sometimes I go back and kick myself and say, man, we really missed the boat. We should have done that thing in the past. But other times we've certainly done it. For example, I think everyone had this experience with COVID. When COVID hit, changed everything from a field marketing perspective. And every trade show was canceled, right? So all the great ideas we had for events and engagement, we had to throw in a pen. And then when they came back, we were able to go back and say, okay, this is a new kind of world of trade shows and experience. What were some of those ideas we had for engaging on a micro event level?
Right.
On a smaller scale at these large events? And can we try any of them out? And are they much more feasible now that the way that people attend trade shows has changed? So it's been pretty interesting to go back and pull some of those ideas and bring them into this year's budget.
Yeah. The the benefit of hindsight, right? And I wish we would have done that. Remind me of that there.
Bitcoin in 2013.
I was just gonna say
only bought.
I was gonna say that. So as it relates to fulfilling your mandate, which is ultimately to support the sales team and to support the sales function, right now or within the recent history, what has been the biggest challenge that you and your team have had to rally around or are rallying around right now? Maybe you know the answer, maybe you don't know the answer, but what's the big elephant in the room right now?
Sure. I think it's the same for a lot of companies in our position. We went from kind of scrappy startup that no one paid attention to, which meant the entire market was ours, right, to go after. Right. Then we went to, oh, wow, they're really coming up. And we had a great string of wins because we had established ourselves a bit and we're starting to eat people's lunch. In certain cases, we're now that incumbent target on our back. We have others gunning for us and our clients. So continuing to win at the same rate and continuing to innovate on your messaging so that you don't become the incumbent that you once displaced is definitely a challenge. And you can't continue to rely on the same tactics, the same messaging, the same audience targeting as you did when you initially started winning. So you kind of have to sometimes take elements of that, but then start fresh and figure out what's the next stage to maintaining where we are while continuing to grow.
Right. Very different challenges, right? When
Absolutely.
you're coming up, it's kind of, you're making a run at the incumbent in the dark when no one's looking, and middle of the night. The channels you use, the messaging you use, the frequency, the budget transforms radically to when you're at the top of the hill, right? And so I guess part of that is understanding where you are in the market at all points in time, right? Because you can't make decisions or change your decisions in marketing if you don't know where you are from a position standpoint. And it happens gradually, doesn't it?
It does. I just celebrated 4 years here in February, and I look back and look at, things like average deal size, and we would look at a certain, number and say, there's no way we can ever close a deal that big. And now that number is lower than our average. And so you look at certain things like that to see, wow, look how far we've come. Look at the assumptions that we've crushed. But at the same time, you say now we have to look at an even bigger number and set a bigger goal for ourselves, because at some point you hit a saturation point and you have to continue to move to other parts of the market, which may be just as scary as those old ones were 4 years back.
Right. Perspective, isn't it? I don't know if you guys work with external partners, but if you do within a marketing function, what has been your approach to facilitating well, first of all, do you guys work with external partners?
We do.
Okay. So for you, what has been your approach? Go ahead. Sorry.
PR firms,
Okay.
design agencies, web, things like that.
Okay, great. So based on that, what has been your approach to facilitating really good relationships? What do you think that your responsibility is as the client, and what role do they need to play to contribute to that perfect marriage? Based on your experience, what's your playbook on that?
My experience is that it's really hard to find good partners for a lot of reasons. Sometimes it's simply too big of a technical hurdle, right? When you're selling something like payments and you're selling it into the financial sector, that's two things that any vendor has to learn to be able to help you. They have to learn about your product and the audience. In addition to that, you have to look at what their priorities are, right? Are they trying to grow their own business and acquire as many new customers as possible? Are they an individual consultant that just wants to help a few people at a time? Right? All of these play into the type of working relationship you want. So some of the things that we found is, if you find someone you like, keep them and keep them close. Even if you're going through a thin stretch where maybe you don't need them as much right now, it's important to continue to work with them and keep them nearby. Because when you do hit a point where you truly need their help and you need them to help scale, you want them ready to go and knowing as much about what's going on in your business as possible to help you do that. So we've stuck with some of our key vendors for really, since I've been here, some of them 3.5, 4 years, through thick and thin. And because of that, they now almost are an employee of our company, right? They know the same things we do. They know what we like and what we don't like. And they're able to engage in the same kind of open, direct feedback that we do. So that way they can tell us, hey, your idea is bust. That's not going to work. What if we do this instead? And we can do the same with them.
Right. It's kind of embracing that idea of client satisfaction is not the same as client success, right? And you need to be able and willing to say, that's a bad idea.
You need to be willing to pay them, right?
Right.
The other part, I think a lot of people, like you're in the agency business. I'm sure you've seen this. Someone says, "Ooh, this is getting a little bit too expensive. I'm going to cut." But they don't realize the cost of finding a new agency, the cost of onboarding a new agency, the cost of all the mistakes that are going to happen along the way, inevitably. That always happens. So it's important to not just look at your vendors and contractors as a line item, but instead of the value they're bringing to you. And if you have to increase that in the same way that you would increase an employee's salary every year, then that's a great investment to make.
Mm. You've seen both sides of it, right? Which probably contributes to, a good, pretty solid approach. I mean, that's kind of, you've sort of defined the ideal dream client partner, right? In the ways of thinking. So good for them and lucky. I'm glad you guys have a good relationship there. As a, as someone growing and learning in their role of building teams, empowering teams, how do you keep yourself sharp? Like where do you go to learn, to improve, rather than just relying on like being in the fire day to day and learning through the bullets?
It has become more challenging, as I mentioned, with 2 kids
Yeah.
and being a husband and owning a home and things like that. Aside from work, free time is at a premium. I like to find inspiration from a lot of third parties, like and other industries and things like that. So for example, I'm on Reddit a lot, and I'll
Yeah.
just find a random subreddit that I know nothing or care nothing about, just to see like how passionate people talk about it in the threads, just to understand and see if I can find any new perspectives. And I find it really fascinating. And that's what kind of keeps me sharp, is after a while, when you keep only reading about, say, fintech or payments or things like that, you get caught up in the tunnel vision, and everyone kind of starts to speak and think the same way. When you go outside of that, you start to see how other parts of the world operate,
Mm.
and kind of how new ideas emerge. So I find that to be really interesting. It's reading forums. And then in general, even though one of my goals is to delegate more, I still do keep a few projects to myself, just to make sure that I'm
You're in the game still, right?
right. You don't want to get too far away where you can't manage it anymore. So I do keep I hoard some of those projects for myself.
That's fine. You can do that. Steve, if I'm not careful here, we'll go forever. So I want to leave you with this
Mhm.
question. For any new, as you grow and as you scale, for any new team members that are looking at PayNearMe as a, potential spot to grow their career and to work at, what can they expect from Steve as it relates to, the way I'm going to get coached, taken care of, held to account? What am I going to expect out of you as a leader and boss?
You're going to get a lot of transparency. You're going to get a lot of honest feedback. And I'm going to expect the same from you. So, anyone I work with, I will continue to poke until you provide that feedback back to me, because I need to know if the way I'm working with you is conducive to your growth. And I think that's a really important part of working with me, or really with anyone, is to understand communication styles and that feedback loop. And in addition to that, I'm just going to expect that you do what you say you're going to do. And I anticipate you to ask for help.
Mm.
For those who are younger that go into a job thinking, I have to nail this, I have to be the superhero, more often than not, that's the cause of work that is a little bit subpar. It's those that consistently ask questions, come to others for help, look for feedback. Those are the people I think that are able to get the best work done faster.
My guest, Steve Murphy, not
Thank you,
Murray.
Caleb.
I really appreciate it. You're busy, 2 kids, your husband, homeowner, all these types of things, to make time for this and to share your experiences and perspectives on these topics. Really meaningful to me, and I know meaningful to those listening.
Thank you. And thank you for having me on before school ended, so we can do this with some quiet around us.
For sure. Absolutely. Thanks, Steve.
Be well.